Good afternoon. My name is Nchimunya Silenga, and I am making a presentation on strengthening voter education. The presentation is going to last for approximately an hour, divided into 30 minutes each. And I will begin my training by discussing the objectives. The objectives of the training is to enhance a common understanding of the framework for the strengthening and delivery of voter education. We also want to explore the principles of voter education. We will also explore the different types of voter education programs, explore the different mediums which we can use to implement our voter education. We also are going to discuss the elements of voter education which involve planning, implementation, evaluation. We are also going to discuss how to design the voter education program. I may not go to specifics per country, but I'll give a general plan. Now, the objective of voter education is to ensure that there is free and fair elections. I know that's a very complicated term, but to encourage as many people as possible to participate in the democratic governance of their country. The purpose of voter education is to increase awareness among the electorate. It also allows an opportunity for voters to participate meaningfully. Voters need to understand why they are participating in voting, and not just to vote because somebody gave them some money. That's very prevalent in where I come from. Voters get bribed. So we are trying to help voters to participate meaningfully in elections. One of the things we need to do when conducting voter education is to have a key understanding of what we are doing. And in this training, we need to understand that voter education is an element of civic education. We also need to understand that there are numerous stakeholders in the electoral process. These include the EMB, the political parties, the voters themselves, civil society, media, etc., etc. We also need to understand that an EMB, that is an electoral management body, must provide and encourage participation in the electoral process. The reason is that we want uniform information to go out. That is why the EMB is responsible in providing this voter education. It is also important to understand that voter education programs must be based on accepted standards and principles, universality, objectivity, and neutrality. Voter education strategies should meet the needs of all stakeholders in the process. So we should remember that there are differently abled people. There are people who can't hear us. So we need to provide for sign language. There are people who can't see. We must provide for Braille for us to be able to achieve our goal. Our voter education program must also be carefully planned. There are various stages in the electoral process, so we must plan for each stage. For example, delimitation, that process needs its own voter education. Voter registration, it needs its own voter education because the messages are specific. The election itself, it needs voter education. When we begin to announce results, that also needs its own voter education because the processes are different and they must be understood. We also need to understand that voter education must be implemented in a timely and efficient manner. It's almost pointless to have voter education 2 days after the election, because who are we talking to? What are we telling them? We must also monitor and evaluate our program. It is also important to document and also look through what we have worked on. All our documentation regarding voter education must be documented and carefully stored so that the next election, you don't have to start from the beginning. You can build up from what you have already done. I am now going to discuss the different, well, not really discuss the different types, but just to broaden the conversation. Let me discuss civic education. When we're discussing civic education, we're merely just building the awareness about civic matters for our citizens, their rights, their governance, their politics. We are aiming at increasing their knowledge so that they can be able to participate as effective citizens, their roles, their duties, what they should expect from the state. We are also aiming at imparting knowledge that will allow citizens to participate fully in their community, their government, and their politics. I'll use an example of where I come from. Politicians are expected to be the savior of the people, to resolve problems of the people. But with civic education, the people can be educated to know that they too have a role to play. They too can bring their civic leaders to account. When we speak to voter education, we are talking about informing the public on their democratic rights in the electoral process, on the entire electoral procedures. We are also discussing candidates and the electorate itself. We are also discussing the skills that will enable our citizens to meaningfully participate in the electoral process. As I said earlier, there's no need for somebody to participate and they don't understand what they're participating for. If I am voting for a particular candidate, I come from a region where we vote for candidates, we don't vote for parties. If I am voting for a candidate, I must understand what the candidate is going to do for me when they go into parliament. I must understand what the candidate will do for me when they become the president of Zambia. And by doing for me, I am not talking about giving me money. I am talking about what they're going to do to improve my entire lifestyle. Are they going to improve the roads? Are they going to improve our education system? Are they going to speak to the laws that govern us? We are also speaking about informing the electorate on the electoral process. For most people, they think elections is just a day of voting. They do not understand that there's a whole process in this discussion. So we need the electorate to understand the entire electoral process. This reduces a lot of misunderstandings, and for regions which are prone to violence, it also reduces the chances of that violence because people will have understood and nobody is going to lie to them. I will still give an example of where I come from. It's very easy for me to come and say the EMB has rigged the election or the ruling party has rigged the election because I know that a lot of my people do not understand the electoral process. So voter education aims at providing information on this process. Why do we have voter education? Voter education plays a role in peace, I would say, because when people are informed, when people understand what's going on, they are going to understand everything that will happen afterwards. They will not sit at home and expect miracles if they did not vote or they did not participate. So they will also not involve themselves in things they're not supposed to involve themselves in, like violence, because they understand the process. So why we are doing voter education is because we want to develop a confident citizenry. We want to reduce as much violence as possible. I have seen an election in Australia where supporters of different political parties, supporters of different candidates are at the polling district and they're having a braai in peace. And when the winning candidate is announced, they celebrate together. That to me tells me that this is a citizen that understands what is going on. They do not fight, they do not kill each other, they get along. That is the reason why we should conduct voter education to be able to reach that level. We also want citizens to participate in civic life. They should be able to hold the leaders accountable, not just have expectations. They should be able to suggest what they want from their leaders, and not make it feel, not be made to feel like the leader is doing them a favor. Citizens also need to assume their roles, their rights, and their responsibilities. In most cases, citizens understand their rights very well. What they do not understand is their role. So citizens need to know that in this entire process, they too have a role. Voter education also allows people to become open, to become tolerant and responsible in the way they exercise their rights and responsibilities. In most cases where there's a lot of electoral violence, it is because people choose not to be tolerant of divergent views. I will insist that my view is the only view and everybody else should follow it. But with civic education and voter education, we are going to teach each other that, look, I like candidate B, you like candidate C. It's okay. Let's agree to disagree. That is okay. We don't have to like everything. Another reason why we should conduct voter education is because people, the citizen must understand their political and civic context. So, Zambia is going to have an election in August. And if anybody has been following the news, you will see that one of the biggest debates we have been having is whether our current president is eligible to run for office again. He has been sworn in twice. Our constitution says the term of office for a president is 5 years. It also says you have to have been sworn in for 2 terms. Then it makes you ineligible. And for most people, I think that they do not understand what that means. And a lot of people are supporting things they don't understand simply because somebody else told them. So if people understood their political and civic context, they would not be having this debate. Everybody would have understood what is expected, and everybody would have understood what should be done. But we are having that debate right now because a lot of us do not understand our political and civic context. So those who understand have kind of manipulated the system, or they've manipulated the situation. So we look forward to August to see what happens. Voter education also allows people to understand their social and economic rights, as well as their political and civil rights. We are having debates of free education, free health, and free association, freedom to meet and belong to an association. But sometimes that freedom is not exactly allowed because people do not understand it. If they understood it, they would not allow for it to be abused. So that is why voter education is very, very important. And I have said before, a lot of people understand their rights, but they do not understand their roles. So citizens need to understand that with freedom comes responsibility. With rights comes responsibility. Because my rights and my freedom end where the next person's begin. That is very important to understand. Voter education allows citizens to acquire the ability to analyze and explain and evaluate a position without having to get involved in violence. I've always thought that for somebody to engage in violence, it's because they cannot defend a position. So if I can't defend a position, I will use what I have, which is physical strength. I will end up beating you because I can't defend my position. If I can defend my position, I can dialogue with you. Voter education builds that kind of skill in people. It also allows for people to use informed participate. They participate in the electoral process from an informed point of view. They will not just do it because they're being coerced. They will not just do it because they think, oh, because I come from the same tribe as John, I will vote for John. I will vote for Peter simply because I understand what Peter is selling to me. I understand Peter's manifesto. So that is what voter education does. Voter education comes with principles. And these are universality. This means that everybody is entitled to this information. There are groups which we would think are kind of vulnerable because of the way society has been set up. Women. In most societies, women do not have a lot of access to a lot of things because of the way the society is set up. Youth do not participate in a lot of activities because they're considered too young to understand. But voter education must speak to them too because they have a role to play. We have people who are disabled, differently abled from us. And in most cases, especially in the underdeveloped world, it's almost like we ignore them. We do not build facilities to accommodate them. So voter education must be able to accommodate these people too. The media, the people who educate our children, we must be able to create a system that allows them to be able to educate our children from a very young age to understand, even if they may not be an age to participate, but at least an age to understand. Civil society groups. This group of people interacts with a lot of members of our society from a very low level. That's the grassroots. So they should be able to benefit from this voter education so that they're able to interact and teach the people they interact with every day. Another principle of voter education is impartiality. By impartial, we are saying that those who are running the voter education programs must avoid partisan information. They must avoid partisan politics. Everybody is supporting a particular candidate. Everybody is supporting a particular party. But for as long as you are the one conducting civic education, voter education, you must be able to leave that partisan part of yourself behind and be very objective. The moment you begin to discuss partisan politics in voter education, it becomes very complicated because you're going to be defending one person's position or one party's position at the expense of the others. So, as a person who is developing voter education programs, who is implementing voter education programs, you must always be impartial. And by impartial, you must also take into consideration unsaid things, our body language, the way we react to somebody we perceive to be from the opposition, from another party. When they speak, how is our facial expression? When they speak, how do we respond? That will tell everybody else who's listening to us if we're impartial or not. And it also speaks to the credibility of the election. It will also affect the confidence. So if the electoral management body is seen to not be impartial, is seen to not be objective, when they announce the results, chances are the society, the country, the citizens will not believe them. So their credibility is hurt. It's also very important to understand that in any country, there is a ruling party and there is the opposition. So when we discuss impartiality, be mindful that some people who are in power may think that you are against them. But it is important to stand your ground and let them understand your message. Once they understand your message, they will understand that you're being impartial, you're doing your job, and you're doing a very good job. Another principle of voter education is clarity. you need to be clear in your messages. Your content must be as simple as possible for every person to understand. And that is why when I started my conversation, I said that the development of civic education material, voter education material, must be done by the electoral management body so that it speaks the same language across the entire country. The electoral management body understands the country, they understand a lot of things. So when they develop the material, they will make it as universal as possible so that anybody anywhere in the country will be able to use it. If you allow any person to develop voter education material, very different messages will be sent out. It will hurt the credibility, it will hurt the confidentiality, it will hurt the impartiality of the EMB. Because if you, for example, allow a media house to produce voter education material, some media houses are inclined to a particular party or candidate. So they are going to develop material that speaks in favor of that candidate. If you engage a political party, and I am the president of the political party, I'm human. Obviously, I'm going to produce material that favors me. So it is important that the EMB produces this material and it's very, very clear. Other principles are non-partisanship, which is similar to being impartial. You must always be non-partisan. Voter education must always be objective. Not to attack anybody, not to attack any stakeholder, but very, very objective. Voter education must also be transparent in the way it's developed. That is why in the few countries where I have worked, I have seen that the EMB would invite various stakeholders to come and participate. They kind of form a committee and they kind of participate and give some input to the materials so that it is clear that when they are developing this material, they're very transparent. They are not favoring any particular person or party. And there must be openness. That is, the EMB or whoever is charged with developing material must be open to new ideas. They must be open to other forms of conducting this voter education. I will now discuss the steps in developing voter education. Because of different contexts, it is important to think about a lot of things as we develop voter education. We need to establish focus. Like I said, the electoral process is like a circle. So as we are developing our voter education material, we need to be aware at what point are we discussing what. So for example, if we're discussing delimitation, we need to focus in that particular area. So when we create a whole chapter or a whole section that discusses voter education relating to delimitation. If we are discussing voter registration, we must focus and not have everything jumbled up. It must be very clear. We also must understand learners. If you are coming from a country like mine, illiteracy levels are very high. So it means that not everybody can understand or speak English. Not everybody can read and write. So as we develop voter education material, we must take that into account and be able to have those people considered. So if it's an environment where they cannot read and understand the official language, in my case, English, we need to develop material in the local language, a language that the target audience will understand. If it's a country which has, let's say, for example, 10 local languages, the EMB must strive to produce material in all the 10 local languages plus English to be able to reach as many people as possible. This speaks to the universality that we talked about when we're talking about principles. Accessibility to resources. It's not enough to just produce the material. The target audience must be able to access it. So we must think about how we're going to make it accessible to who we are targeting. Is it social media? Are we using brochures? Are we using flyers? Are we using mass media? All those things must be able to be factored in as we develop our voter education. We must select our objectives. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? That is key. We must design the process. How are we going to conduct this voter education? Are we going to go voter door to door? Are we going to engage trainers who are going to train? Are we going to engage facilitators? We must realize that voter education, unlike voting itself, voting, people must come to the polling station to cast their vote because they're designated centers. But for voter education, that makes it very difficult. If we are targeting marketeers, for example, you can go to a market and ask the marketeers to stop trading so they can come to your voter education session at the town hall, for example. You can't do that. So you need to design a process that will allow you to be able to go to the marketplace and conduct this voter education in the market. Because if you tell people to leave their trading and come to the town hall to listen to you, chances are they will not come because they need to make money to feed their families. So as we discuss voter education, we must discuss how we're going to conduct it. So the process and how we're going to implement it. We must also discuss how we're going to evaluate our program. Monitoring and evaluation in most cases is kind of neglected because we think it's not important. Or maybe it's because we don't know. We kind of think, and you see, what you don't know usually intimidates you. So you kind of just neglect it a little bit. But it's important to evaluate it. If in the last year you conducted voter education at the marketplace, you need to check, was it worth it? Did it work? How many people did we reach? How many people, as a result of the voter education, ended up coming to register as voters? How many people, as a result of the voter education, came to cast their vote? That is important because then you'll know if you're not doing it right or which areas you need to improve. We also need to document and archive our program. We need to store so that the people who come after us are able to build on what we have already started instead of having to start from the beginning. And now life has been made simple. We have a digital way of storing information. So we must always document everything from the beginning and to reach to where we're at our current status for future use. When we are discussing voter education, we need to think about the key themes. What are we talking to our citizens about? Some of the key things we can talk to our citizens about are democracy and citizen participation. This involves discussions on what it means to be democratic, the types of democracy, the principles and importance of democracy. But most important, when we're discussing voter education, we should make it specific to our country. When you're talking to the citizens, it's important for us to just be specific to our country so that they understand that the political context we're in is like this. It's also important to discuss rights and responsibilities, barriers to democracy, and gender issues. In some societies, men and women do not easily interact because that is how the society is. In some societies, women earn less than men, even if they hold the same job. So it's important to discuss these matters. In other societies, women cannot run for political office, or if they do, they will be looked at as pariahs, they'll be looked at as uncultured. So we need to discuss those things because they are kind of barriers to democracy. Another theme we can think about when discussing voter education is elections and democracy. Why it's important to have elections. Citizens must understand why we hold elections as a country, why that is important. There are countries that have a monarch system. It works for them. There are countries that must have elections. So that is important to discuss. It's important to discuss the electoral system of a particular country for citizens to understand. And I'll use Zambia, my country, as an example. Again, in Zambia, we vote for a president directly. That means I have to go to the polling station and vote for the president I want. In some countries, they use electoral colleges. In other countries, it's different. So it's important for the citizens to understand the system that their country uses. So when they participate, they know what it means. If they are voting for a representative to go and vote on their behalf for a president, they must understand that. If they are voting for their president directly, they must understand that too. It's also important for citizens to understand how elections are managed. While I worked for an electoral management body, I would get questions like, so what do you do after the election? Because citizens don't know that there's a lot of work put in that one-day event. They think you just sit there, probably just maybe never even got to the office. So they need to understand that there are so many things at play behind the scenes just to prepare for that one big day. And also understand that an election is an event that works with dates. When you miss a deadline, you mix a lot of things, you mess up a lot of things. It's important for citizens to understand that. It's also important for citizens to understand the stakeholders in the electoral process. In most cases, citizens don't know that they're stakeholders. They kind of remove themselves from the process and they think it's them and not us. So they need to understand that there are various stakeholders in the electoral process. Yes, there's a EMB, there's a political party, there's the media, there's the church, but they too, as citizens, are stakeholders. And it's important for them to understand that they're stakeholders and their role in the electoral process. Another key theme that we should discuss whilst conducting voter education or developing voter education material is governance and leadership. Our citizenry needs to understand the meaning and levels of governance. We have local leaders. We have leaders who represent us in parliament. We have a president. All those levels must be understood and how we relate to those levels of governance as citizens. For example, if I want a school in my area, I need to understand that I do not go to the president. I go to my local leader, who in my case is called a councillor. And I say to the councillor, look, I come from an area where we have 200 children who do not have access to a school. Are you able to provide a school, provide access to this for these children to get some education? The local leader will know how to move from there. Because if I went directly to the president, chances are I will not first be able to access the president. He will not hear me because at his level, he's dealing with national matters. Our citizens also need to understand the institutions of governance. There are various institutions of governance. We have the executive, we have the judiciary, we have the legislature. We need to understand who falls under what. The judiciary They implement the laws that the legislature has put in place. So citizens must understand those institutions of governments, and when things are not going right, where to go. So, for example, if I think that my leader is corrupt, I need to know which institution I should go to report. Am I going to the police? Am I going to the Anti-Corruption Commission? Where am I going? It's important to understand that. It's also important to understand the types of leadership. I noticed that a lot of people will vote for me simply because I gave them something. I gave them money, I gave them food, and they will vote for me. They do not understand that by putting me in office, it will be very difficult to remove me. So for the next term, which is in most cases is 4 or 5 years, I will sit there and do nothing for them because they voted me, who is a bad leader. So if I don't understand leadership, if I don't understand the qualities of a good leader, I'm most likely going to vote for the person who gave me the most money. So if I can bribe you to vote for me, what will happen when I'm in office? So citizens must understand that. And they must understand that it's possible to have good governance. And the way we can enforce or entrench good governance is by holding our leaders accountable and not fear our leaders. So, and in most cases, it has a lot to do with culture. If in a culture like mine, you are expected to hold a leader in high esteem, it's difficult to question the leader because the leader is seen as wise. The leader is seen as the most smart. You literally cannot question them. But voter education kind of frees people. It kind of gives people that confidence to be able to question certain things. Another theme to discuss when developing voter education is the electoral process. Like I said earlier, there are people who don't understand that people who work in the EMB have work to do for so many years toward that particular day. There is delimitation. The public must understand what delimitation is. There is voter registration. The public must understand what voter registration is and how they can participate. Similarly, in delimitation, the public must understand that they must participate in delimitation because the limitation speaks to boundaries of their voting districts. Inspection of the register. Once you have registered as a voter, you need to be able to go and inspect the register to make sure that your name is in the register. It also gives you an opportunity to make sure that people who do not qualify to be on the register are off the register because you are going to know. So, for example, if your 15-year-old child has been registered as a voter and you know that this is your child, and whilst you're inspecting the register, you are going to see your child's name. In most cases, a lot of voter registers have a picture. You will see that this is your child. They are underage. You are going to inform the EMB that my son, Peter, is underage and cannot be in the register because they're not eligible. So that is what inspection does for you. Nomination of candidates. The citizen must understand that a candidate will not just pop up. There is a process for a candidate to appear on the ballot. This is nomination. It also discusses how you are able to feature on the ballot. Political campaigns. Citizens must understand what a campaign is. They must understand what can be done and cannot be done during a campaign. They must understand that tearing another person's posters or involving yourself in violence just because you do not agree with my views is not campaign. Citizens must understand voting. They must understand how votes are counted. They must understand the announcement and declaration. We have had a lot of instances where citizens are getting information from particularly one area, which shows that a particular candidate is winning. When they now get the full picture of the entire country, they find that candidate C has won, and they don't understand because they only had access to information from one particular area and for one particular candidate. So if they understand that their country is large and is divided in so many parts, for you to declare the winner, you have to have counted so many votes. They will desist from a lot of illegal things that is done, especially violence. When we're implementing voter education, we need to use some principles, something to guide us. We need to think about what kind of information and what kind of how we're going to share this information that is very effective, that will reach our target, and that will have high impact. So I spoke to illiteracy. Just because I cannot speak English does not make me useless. If you teach me in my local language, I will understand and I will participate meaningfully. However, we must also know that there are some people who just won't sit there and listen to you talk. But if you teach me through a song, I will understand you better. If you teach me through a play, I will understand you better. It will have a higher impact than you coming to my home and just talking, because you'll be talking alone. Chances are you will not give me an opportunity to speak to you. You will be talking alone. I may lose concentration or I may be busy, so I may not have that time. But if it is a song, if it is a play, it will be more effective and will have a higher impact. So it's important to think about the effective ways to reach our targets, which will impact them highly. And all these ways must be tabled and taken into consideration because the targets are different. How we are going to reach all our polling districts, that must be thought of as we are thinking about our implementation framework. It's important to also identify which groups need the voter education the most. And mostly it's the vulnerable people. They have been vulnerable for such a long time. They do not have a lot of access to things that we have, those of us who live in the urban areas especially. So they're just looking for help. So if I am a politician, I'm a political party, and I want votes, I'll most likely go to an area I know is very vulnerable, give them a few monies, and tell them vote for me. When the EMB comes, they should make it clear that citizens, even if they're vulnerable, are free to vote for a candidate of their choice. And that nobody will ever know which particular individual voted for which particular candidate. They have to feel safe. There must also be common themes and issues. I have already spoken to themes and issues. It's also important to be very sensitive and very responsive to what's happening in the locality. So, for example, I spoke to some societies where men and women cannot just interact anyhow. So it means that in the delivery of our water education, we must come up with a strategy of how we're going to speak to the women and how we're going to speak to the men. So if you're coming to my society, men are mostly found in a pub. So you should be able to go to a pub and conduct your water education. Our women are mostly found at the place where they draw water, at the well. You should be able to go to the well and speak to the women. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the church will allow you to conduct water education. But then, not everybody goes to the same church. Not everybody goes to church at the same time or the same day. So that strategy must be thought through. How are we going to reach the people who go to church on a Saturday? How are we going to reach the people who go to church on a Sunday? When I speak to being sensitive, it's important to be aware of the culture. In some cultures, as a woman, you must be dressed in a certain way. And we have what we call a wrapper. It's a chitenge. The local language, it's called a chitenge. It's a wrapper. And if you're going to be speaking to elderly people, you must be wearing the chitenge as a sign of respect. Otherwise, you will not get the audience. You must also be alive to the fact that in some cultures, you cannot be standing in front of elders. So as we think about the way we're going to deliver our voter education, we must think of all these issues and be able to come up with strategies that will be very, very useful to us. It's also important to know that if I am the one who's conducting the voter education, I must be able to speak the local language of the area where I am going. Because if I'm going to speak English, it will be very useless. Even if they understand English, it shows more respect if you speak to elders in their local language. And they will respond better when you speak to them in their local language, even if they understand English. So all those factors must be thought through as we develop our strategy. Here ends part 1 of my presentation. And I can move on to part 2, or we can have a break.